Israeli activist, but more precisely I'm a much privileged Jewish Israeli activist for Palestinian rights. I'm a conscientious objector to military service. All militaries, but especially in the case of Israel-Palestine. An activist against the wall, which is the Israeli branch of the Palestinian popular struggle, which is joined by internationals and Israelis. What we call the joint struggle, which is a popular struggle. Also a non-violent struggle, but most importantly, it's a popular struggle, meaning coming from the people rather than being dictated by the different political factions. And also member of Boycott from Within, which is an Israeli branch of the Palestinian-led BDS struggle, boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. And I hope that we'll cover all of that. Also want to have a little bit of a discussion here, because I think there's really a lot of room for activity in this place, and it's really, it feels good that there's potential. So let's go back a little bit. I mentioned that I'm a privileged Israeli Jew. What do I mean by that? Going back to the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, the state was founded on the basis of ethnic cleansing and ethnic segregation. That's the very basic, the most fundamental part about the founding of the Jewish democratic state. So it was founded, there was the UN partition plan that you know of, that was not a very just, not a very fair plan. But this was not the main Palestinian tragedy. By the way, it didn't come into fruition, this plan. But this wasn't the main Palestinian tragedy. The main Palestinian tragedy was that the founders of the state insisted to have, the founders of the Jewish state, insisted to have a Jewish and democratic state. Now, I don't know what that means, to have a Jewish and democratic state. It doesn't stand to logic. But what it meant for them was that they needed to create a Jewish majority in a place where there was predominantly non-Jews. Only 30, maybe 33% of the population between the river and the sea, between the Jordan River and the sea, were Jews. So the first thing that they needed to do in order to have a Jewish and democratic state was to create a Jewish majority by force, meaning expelling the native people of the land. Ever since 48 until today, this is what's happening with, this is a continuous thing, constantly happening by different means. It started by force, expelling the people of the land, what we call the Nakba of 1948. More or less 700,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes, about 530 villages were demolished. And ever since, in different ways, mostly by legal means, people are being disenfranchised, kicked away from their land, and everything is done in a way in order to give privileges to people like myself, ethnic Jews, from the select ethnic group, on account of the basic rights of the non-Jews. And I'm talking about 1948 here. This is before the later occupation of the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. Now, there are many racist laws that have been enacted right from the get-go, and since there were more and more racist laws, including in recent years, the right-wing fascist government of Netanyahu and Lieberman took this a step further, and they've legislated even more racist laws. But this is not new. It started from the very beginning, and many more racist practices. So we're struggling against that. Going a little forward in history, 1967, Israel occupied the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, and ever since, there's been the longest running military occupation in modern time. People, 3.5 million Palestinians, are living in subhuman conditions, especially those in Gaza, where over 1.5 million people are living in undescribable conditions. 95% of the water is not drinkable, is not fit for human consumption. Calories are being counted by the Ministry of Defense. This was published recently, official documents, showing how Israel is not interested in genocide in Gaza, but it is interested in counting calories to keep people just above starvation, but just barely above starvation. Now, obviously, this is also a statistical thing. So if you keep people just above starvation, it means that some people are just above and some are just below. They've also adapted their criteria in order to suit the local population, meaning that the local population doesn't mean so much nourishing ingredients like fruits and vegetables, and they need more sugar and flour according to the Israeli Ministry of Defense. But this is as far as they are going. They're actually counting calories for people in Gaza. So we have the occupation of Gaza, which is at the moment under siege. Israel controls every aspect of life there, even though they claim otherwise. We have the West Bank, that is being controlled in different ways. Obviously, you know about the illegal settlements that are being built there, and many more are being built as we speak. But it's not only about grabbing of the land, Palestinian land, it's also about control. So it's about the land, it's about the water resources. About 60% of the water of the West Bank is being diverted into Israel. It's about the minerals. You know about Ahava, Dead Sea Products, for example. That is a company that is, apart from acting in occupied Palestinian territory, they're also stealing the resources, which is another crime in itself, which is pillage. So they're also complicit in that. And mainly it's about the control. It's about not allowing people to have their most basic rights and to have decent lives, to be able to move from one place to another freely, to be able to do what every one of us does without even thinking twice about it. Then we have East Jerusalem. That is another form of occupation. Israel doesn't treat East Jerusalem as occupied territory, but as we know it is. Under international law, the case is very clear. Under international law, and this was decided in July 2004, a landmark decision by the ICJ, International Court of Justice, and the court said very clearly, unanimously, that the whole of the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem are occupied Palestinian territories. Every single settlement is illegal, and every inch of the wall has to be dismantled. International law is very clear about it. There's no question about it. The human rights aspect is also very clear. If we look at any human rights organizations report about the situation, and there's many of them, they're also very clear about the situation. Israel doesn't regard human rights issues in occupied Palestine. And still this carries on. So in East Jerusalem, there's another form of occupation. Many people there, Jerusalemites, actually have an Israeli residency, which is a little different than being Israeli citizens. They are allowed to vote for the municipality, for example. They are not being treated as if they are under military occupation, but still the laws are such that it is very easy to evict people out of their homes. It is very difficult to receive building permits, for example. Now, the moment the land is Arab-owned, Palestinian-owned, then it is close to impossible to build legally. And the moment the land stops being Palestinian-owned, all of a sudden it's very easy to get a building permit for that spot of land. That's how it works. You know that many Jerusalemites go to study abroad. It's very easy for them, even though they've been living there for generations, it's very easy for them if they go to study here at Goldsmiths for a couple of years, to lose the rights to ever go back to their homeland, to their homes. So many of these forms of ethnic cleansing and other forms of driving away people from their land is being done not by sheer force but by legal means. And you have to remember that. So we said the international law is very clear about it. Human rights violations are very clear, and also the case there is very clear. So why is this carrying on for such a long time? The longest running military occupation in modern time. And on the one hand, these things are very clear. On the other hand, what is also very clear is that Israel has the full backing of the powers at be. The US is supporting Israel 100%, militarily, financially, diplomatically. Even about the most trivial things, like the building of the settlements. There was a decision in the UN stating that the West Bank settlements are illegal, Jewish-only settlements, that they're illegal, they're built on Palestinian land, and so on. Obviously, there was the decision that indeed these settlements are illegal, and obviously the US, in contradiction to its stated foreign policy, vetoed that decision. So even the most trivial decisions are being actually pushed aside by the US. And then, of course, there's the military funding. Israel receives funding from the US as much as all other countries in the world combined. It receives full diplomatic support, and so on. Unfortunately, also the EU is heavily complicit. I've spent 3 months in the European Parliament representing the Palestinian protest struggle, along with a Palestinian colleague, and I've seen this up close. But also, just a few weeks ago, there was another upgrade to the European